So I'm now pleased to introduce our next speaker, Emma King, CEO at the Victorian Council of Social Service. Emma has perhaps the hardest job in the NGO sector as the peak of the peaks, I think. She's been incredibly supportive of our sector and the Federation. Emma joined VCOSS as CEO in 2013 and since then has provided strong leadership and advocacy on social justice issues for the community sector. Prior to this, Emma was CEO at the Early Learning Association Australia, and she has an extensive background in the public sector on workforce and education issues in particular. Emma has worked as a Victorian policy advisor, a teacher, and in a range of industrial relations and training roles. Emma is also the president of the Farnham Street Neighbourhood Learning Centre and a board member of Mental Health Victoria and the Portable Long Service Authority. Thanks so much for joining us today, Emma. I know you're incredibly busy, so giving us time we really appreciate. We'd love to hear from you about the 10-year community service industry plan that VCOSS led and the inspiration behind, which was the inspiration behind developing our plan for the sector. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Serena, and thank you very much for having me. If I can begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we all meet today. I'm meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and of course to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I'd also like to pay my sincere thanks to Serena, the fantastic work of the Federation, and to my fellow panellists. Following the Attorney General is a pretty big ask, so it's very flattering to be asked to do that, and also being online with Anna as well is fantastic, so thank you. So thanks for inviting me here today in terms of as a community legal sector embarks on the very exciting process of industry planning. It's a really brilliant time to be at, and it's fantastic that you're commencing this process. As Serena mentioned earlier, I'll be speaking around the broader piece of work that we undertook, which was around the development of a 10-year community services industry plan. And I thought it might be helpful just to start in terms of giving some context around that. So the development of the 10-year community services industry plan really began in 2016, and it was a partnership process between VCOSS, the Victorian Government and HISPC, because we love an acronym in our sector. So HISPC is the Human Services and Health Partnership Implementation Committee. And the group includes VCOSS, representatives of government and a broad range of other organisations. So for example, Carers Victoria, CHIA, Council for Homeless Persons, Domestic Violence Victoria, Youth Affairs Council of Victoria and many others as well. And I take the time to mention these organisations not only because I want to mention that it wasn't around and sort of VCOSS embarking on this project alone, but because it goes to the very principles of partnership and broad engagement and co-design. And I do not use the word co-design lightly. I use it for the genuine co-design process and very meaningful consultation that was fundamental to the success of developing the plan. And you know that because that's why we're all here today. We started our industry planning process with a few broad facts. So the things that we knew already, so we knew that the community services industry was really important, it was very strong and it was extremely diverse. And we also knew, importantly, that it was growing and it's growing and continues to grow. It grows really, really fast. So at that time, there was over 160,000 Victorians who were employed in the community services space, it's about 5% of the state's workforce. And then looking at ACNC data, we knew that we were seeing, at that point, a 27% growth. And that was between 2015 and 2018. And the sector was worth, want a better term, but it was worth about $19 billion. So I don't think that had been well understood by government and others. And in terms of the ACNC data, it was really useful to be able to take that sort of slice of Victorian statistics and talk about, well, this is who we are and this is our worth to the Victorian community, because I think everyone on this line knows and understands it, but being able to articulate it to people who might not be in our usual tent can otherwise be challenging. So while the sector's really strong, we're also realistic about the challenges associated with change and with growth. So we wanted to look at and understand the economic and the social changes that were really driving these trends and how they might help us when we look into the future. We also wanted to analyse the policy landscape, both at a state and at a federal level. And the industry planning for us was really about the future that we collectively want for the community services industry. It's about our future together as an industry and working as best as we possibly could with government as our partner. So to design the process, we talked to community service organisations. I suspect many of you who are on the call today with peak bodies, with service providers, with community groups, employers and employees. We held targeted regional consultations across the state, similar to what I'm mentioning, Serena mentioning earlier. We drafted a discussion paper, which organisations responded to via an online consultation. We convened 2 pretty large planning symposiums. And again, I'm sure many of you were there. And we commissioned an evidence review of Australian and international research and evidence as well. And we analysed the data for what it could tell us about organisations and the workforce of organisations. And through the consultations, the industry told us about what the goals of the plans should be and what the plan should do. So we were told that the plan should prepare the community services industry for transformational change, solve acute workforce shortages, to support the professionalisation of workers in the sector, and to position the industry as providing an essential service. And that is that all Victorians at some point in their lives may need the essential service that is offered throughout the community services sector, and that we're essential for a society in which people can live a good life. So that's the challenge that we set ourselves. And I'm sure a lot of the challenges and themes that affect the wider social services sector are incredibly familiar to all of you as well. So with this work done, we prioritised 10 priority areas and designed draft actions for each. We then tested these priorities through conversations with organisations. And one key theme that emerged throughout all of these discussions was place-based services. So we heard evidence about why, when, and how place-based approaches work to tackle seemingly unsolvable problems. Solving problems like poverty clearly can't be achieved by one health service or family services or legal services or one government department on their own. And it highlighted the need for very much around collaborative actions and joint accountability, as well as local leadership and flexibility in government funding and in contracts. And we heard, as you all know, that what is really important is about change in people's lives isn't about not only about what organisations deliver. This really, again, spoke to the need, I think, around shifting focus from sort of counting occasions of service, which is how often we're funded, to measuring the actual change that we're creating. But as you know, it's complex. So there's lots of outcomes frameworks that are out there, and there are many organisations who've got their own systems in place already. On top of this, different people, communities and programs are pursuing different outcomes, as they should be, because every person, every family and every community is different. So how do you bring all that together under one plan? And that was one of the very real challenges that we faced. So we embraced the concept of small steps. And forgive my mixing of metaphors here, but we weren't talking about building Rome in one day. It was very much around from little things, big things grow. Which is why our first rolling action implementation plan talked about streamlining data collection, getting better at sharing data between government departments, remembering this wasn't just about the sector, it was also about government and about the partnerships, and mapping and building on existing outcomes frameworks within the system, baby steps. One of the other key things we heard was about the need for a workforce ready to face the demands of the future. People told us that we need a pipeline of workers coming into the system equipped with the right skills, training and experience. We need to be able to keep people once we've got them, not to lose them to other better paid or more secure jobs. So what that means, of course, is we don't want to push people into insecure jobs. We need better funding. We need longer term funding, not just one-year contracts, and recognition of the true cost of service delivery. So our shared vision is around the community services industry as an industry of choice for job seekers, with secure employment and really rewarding career paths, and one that reflects the diversity of the community with which we serve. But as I said earlier, one of the first steps in the plan is knowing more about the workforce through better data collection. And it was great to hear you mention that earlier as well, Serena, and the analysis to help us plan for workforce development and recruitment. So we're now at the end of the first rolling implementation plan. And like everything else, COVID has very much forced us to rethink where to from here. So it's actually a really exciting time, I think, that you're starting your planning now as well. So some of the actions in our plan have seen really huge and probably unexpected progress in the time that we've had in the COVID period. So for a perfect example of that is digital innovation and technology. Others have slowed as we've prioritised the emergency response. And it's been a really good lesson that a document like this needs to be a living, breathing document. And I know we knew the world would change in the time, but clearly we had no idea as to the degree to which it would. So the aspirations and the vision remain the same, but the how we get there changes as the world around us changes as well. So to summarise, and I suspect from listening to Serena's introduction, I think you're all over this. Be collaborative. We know that you go fast alone, but you go further together. Test your assumptions, and it's that, continually testing with each other and throughout. Have big goals, be aspirational, but kind of start small in terms of the steps, and revisit and revise. And I think that's been our biggest learning throughout, is in terms of don't be afraid to acknowledge when something needs changing or something perhaps doesn't go to plan. So I hope that the experience that we had is of use to you, and I'm really excited about the stage that you're at. So thank you again, Serena, for having me.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was so wonderful to hear more about the very big process that you embarked on across the community services sector. That we found that as a federation incredible to be part of, and how you led that process, and the issues that you grappled with, and again in that very collective way, was incredibly valuable, and is the seed for this work we're now undertaking. You spoke about workforce, and I know we've had lots of conversations about workforce issues for our sector. It was incredible for VCOSS to do that analysis of actually the size of the community legal sector, its economic value, the fact that it's growing, and indeed we're in the middle of embarking on that process on behalf of CLCs. Even our early sort of data is showing we're not as small as we thought we were. We're certainly from systemic underfunding for a long period of time. From a funding point of view, it's a smaller pool than other sectors. But for example, we now know that we're probably a similar size to our legal aid colleagues in terms of the size of our respective parts of the broader legal assistance sector. But we have challenges in the sense that, like the broader community services, we have lower pay rates than our public sector colleagues. The opportunities for career progression and development are lower, again, because of our smaller organisations and resource constraints. So we also know, like the broader community services sector, our sector, that women are the vast majority of the workforce, upwards of 70%. So this is also a gendered issue. So how important is it, do you think, for sort of gender equality to strengthen the workforce in the sectors, and also for the future of our sectors to really develop our workforce and that be sort of recognised?
It's a really great question. And actually we appeared before a federal Senate this morning where I was asked a similar question. It was around sort of security of workforce and gig economy and those sorts of things as well. And when you look at, so more broadly, healthcare and social services, it's growing faster than I think any other component of our of the workforce. If you look at ABS data, and that issue around the very gendered nature of work, and often then what's not valued in the same way. So we see that play out in a variety of different ways. And I suspect if you did a cut, and you probably have of broader law firms and community legal services, you'd see which one is considerably more feminised and what that means when it comes to pay rates, etc. as well. So we see that across the board when we look at the work that that's seen as women's work more generally. And I'm not talking here necessarily about that cracking through the glass ceiling type thing, because that is an issue in and of itself. But when we look at a sector that's predicated on, that's highly feminised, a lot of the work is also there's short-term contracts, inadequate funding. We see organisations continue looking to fundraise or sort of cross-subsidise work from other areas. We know that issue around the gendered nature of work is really significant, and one that we have to address, because our workforce of the future can't be one that's based on lacking, not giving women the value that women deserve in the workforce and in our society. And that flows on in a whole lot of different ways, as everyone on this call knows. But also we need a workforce that actually has really strong underpinnings, and that is, contracts for a decent period of time. And even the Productivity Commission suggested they've got to be 5 to 7 years long. We know we don't have that. They've got to be funded appropriately, and we can't have a casualised and precarious workforce, because it's bad for everyone. It's bad for workers themselves. It's bad for employers, because we know we constantly lose people. They're 6 months into a 1-year contract. They don't want to take the risk. Another job comes up and they take it. And it's really bad for our broader society, because in terms of the impact in terms of the services they receive, but also in terms of when we look at one of the challenges we've got, I think, when we've got a really feminised sector when it comes to aged care and disability, etc., is there's every chance your clients are going to be people who've got jobs in our sector. They'll just be working in aged care, disability and other parts of the sector. So it's a significant issue that we need to address, and we need to address collectively.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't agree more. I think the broader issue of gender inequality and how it sort of plays out still traditionally in the home and overflows into the workforce in terms of undervaluing of women's contribution. I think the chance for us to make it an issue and sort of advocate collectively is significant. So I so look forward to doing that. I feel like I could sort of ask you that I literally have a dozen questions I would love to ask you that I think would be so beneficial for our sector to hear from. So, but I'm conscious of time and finishing on time for our audience. And so I just want to thank you again. We will have you back if we can to sort of future forums with our membership, which I will appreciate in advance, because you're very generous with your time. And also we'll just acknowledge how fortunate it's been for us to go through that process with VCOSS, and how generous you've been with sharing your learnings in terms of what you've pointed out in terms of having broad vision, but also being realistic about steps, stopping and reflecting, not being afraid to reflect and go, this hasn't worked, and remaining united in that collective approach has absolutely sort of guided and made this process so much easier for us. So thank you for sharing that wealth of experience.
Thanks, Serena. And can I just give a big shout out to everyone on the call as well, because it's, the community legal sector does the most phenomenal job. And I just want to give a shout out to everyone on this call, and also really acknowledge the brilliant work that you do and your colleagues at the Federation. It's very much appreciated. And as you said, it's about all being in it together. So very much appreciated. And thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks so much.